The powers that be saw fit to flex the Los Angeles Chargers hosting the Cincinnati Bengals to Sunday Night Football. Let's cross over Locked On Bengals, Locked On Chargers to break it down.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's time for another Locked On crossover here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Jake Liscow from Locked On Bengals, joined today by David Droegemeier from Locked On Chargers. As we always do, we've got your biggest stories for both teams and the keys to victory leading into another prime time game here. David, we're going to talk about the Bengals and the Chargers in this one. As always, the Locked On crossovers brought to you by PrizePicks, where you can use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5. We appreciate all of you out there who make your Locked On podcast of choice your first listen, all the everydayers out there. And if you're new to Locked On Bengals or Locked On Chargers, well, you're in for a treat. You get a crossover for your first episode, and you can hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to join one of those two exclusive clubs of listeners. And David, as always, we're going to get started with the biggest stories, and this week we'll start with the Los Angeles Chargers. Tell me, what's going on with that offense? It looks to me from the outside looking in that it's Justin Herbert, a decent offensive line that we'll have to get into in a little bit more depth, Ladd McConkey, and tell me more about what the essence of this version of that LA Chargers offense is about as they go into week 11.
Yeah, so I think the Chargers offense, in kind of stark contrast to the last few years, is let's take some off of Justin Herbert's plate. Let's not make Justin Herbert have to do absolutely everything. And I think that's really what the formula was. The formula was, hey, let's get Justin Herbert a really good defense. Let's get him a more competent running game. And then let's let Justin Herbert go out there and manage the game, make the big plays and the big throws when I need him to, but not have to put all of the pressure and all of the expectations all on his plate solely. So that's what it is, at least in the principle, that's what they want it to look like. Obviously they have had some struggles trying to affirm that identity, which is in stark contrast to what they have done in the past. But I think the biggest storyline for me here is, can Justin Herbert stay hot? I mean, Justin Herbert over the last month has been fantastic. I mean, since week 7, according to PFF, he's made 13 big time throws and had 0 turnover worthy plays, and he has only 1 interception this season. He has one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in the NFL. This is going to be a great quarterback matchup. 2 of the best pure passers in the league, in my opinion, with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. But hey, it's going to be offense versus defense. So I'm excited to see what Justin Herbert's going to do against the Bengals defense. And it's going to be obviously a big story in this game because we know the Bengals can score. Let's see if the Chargers are going to be able to keep up.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about the way the Chargers have turned around their approach in the Harbaugh era with Justin Herbert, trying to take things off of his plate. When you juxtapose that with what the Cincinnati Bengals this year are doing with Joe Burrow, where there's so much on Burrow's shoulders and on Jamar Chase's shoulders. And if you look at the defense, you can throw Trey Hendrickson into the mix as well, where Bengals fans would tell you that you have arguments for an MVP candidate in Joe Burrow, an offensive player of the year candidate, and a Triple Crown leader currently in Jamar Chase, where today, by the way, media had to define for Joe Burrow what the wide receiver Triple Crown was. He wasn't aware of the Triple Crown in the NFL. I thought that was a funny moment. And Trey Hendrickson leads the league in sacks and would be a candidate for defensive player of the year. But everything is so firmly on Burrow's shoulders. You talked about bumps in the road and affirming that identity. Where are those bumps and how have they been dealing with them and overcoming them? Because obviously you look up and the Chargers are now 6-3.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you look at the schedule and it's probably been a little bit softer, save for the Steelers and the Chiefs, but I mean, they can only play the teams that are on their schedule, and that's never been a guarantee in the past, playing a quote-unquote bad team. The Chargers have found ways to lose to those teams for several years, so them having a new leader who is a proven culture changer in Jim Harbaugh, his whole identity is physicality. It's, I want to run the ball. I want to dominate the line of scrimmage. I want to be physical. I want to be tough. I want to be technically sound. Those are the things that Jim Harbaugh really harps on, and the attention to detail. But, the running game has been up and it's been down. I think that's really been the inconsistent part of the offense, which has caused lulls in some of their drives, especially in the second half of games. Now, it's been better recently. They've done a better job of scoring in the second half, but in the beginning part of the season, they had some good drives, and then they had 3 and out, back to back to back. So it's just eliminating those empty drives and trying to put together more consistent drives, which is aided by a running game that has been inconsistent. Now, last week, Gus Edwards came back off of IR, looked much, much healthier, and really contributed to that 1-2 punch, that kind of smash and dash that they thought they were going to have with J.K. Dobbins.
Obviously, a lot of help coming from the defensive side of the ball.
Of course.
Well. And it's the best scoring defense in the NFL, obviously. And when you point that out to Bengals fans, they'll tell you that, well, they played the Raiders. They played the totally defunct Carolina Panthers.
Sure.
They played the early season Denver Broncos. I would say that Arizona is a pretty good offense, but then you add in the foundering and floundering New Orleans Saints, the Cleveland Browns, the Tennessee Titans into the mix. You can only play the team across from you, however,
sure,
as you point out, and the Bengals have played some of those teams and managed to give up points. What's the story with this Chargers defense that is looking at a tougher stretch of opposing offenses coming up here on their schedule?
Absolutely. And the thing with the Chargers defense is, including the Chiefs, including the Steelers, they have not given up more than 20 points to any team this entire season. So yes, the majority of their team, the teams they've played have been against subpar quarterbacks and subpar offenses, which is why this biggest story here is, can they prove it against an elite quarterback, right? And a very high-powered offense that can score points, right? That right there, this is the real first litmus test to see if this Chargers defense is for real, because Jesse Minter is going to have to put together a very good game plan. Joe Burrow is super hot right now, 9 touchdowns over his past 2 games. There's some uncertainty on Christian Fulton's availability, who has been the Chargers' top corner this year. He's been truly phenomenal when he's been on the field. Can, the backup corners, the rookie 5th-round picks, Cam Hart and Tarheeb still going up against, probably one of the better tandem of wide receivers in the league if T. Higgins is out there. What Jamar Chase brings to the table. He, showcased that for the world, going 260 yards of freaking offense, which is insane. I mean, that dude is unbelievable. But as you said, not much help. The Chargers need to prove it here against one of the best receivers and one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
It's a bit of a litmus test for the Cincinnati Bengals on the other side of things as well. And we'll get into that coming up in just a minute, but it's so fun to hear you talk about the Chargers in some ways and think about how these things apply to the Bengals, or, how you compare them to what's going on in Cincinnati. And there's some opposite things happening, especially with the supporting cast and the priorities. And, you're talking about the corners and dealing with Jamar Chase, and rightly so. That's every defensive coordinator's priority. But then I look at those defensive pass rushing group that you've got with the Los Angeles Chargers, led by the ageless wonder Khalil Mack. And we'll probably have time to talk about Khalil Mack. We'll have time to talk about Ladd McConkey, an object of some Bengals fans' draft dreams this prior year, when we get to some of the matchups. But let's pivot, David, and let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the Cincinnati Bengals coming up next.
But first, I got to tell you guys about Hillsdale College. History, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. Did you study these things in school? Probably not. Or even if you did, maybe it's time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they have not changed basic, fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning of history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon.
This crossover episode is also sponsored by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, FanDuel's new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So when we look at the Los Angeles Chargers hosting the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football, and you see that 1.5 point spread, regardless of the team you root for, if you feel really good about one of those picks, you can put $5 down. And if you get that pick right, that's $150 in bonus bets for you with FanDuel. And it's not just lines and money lines and that sort of thing. They've got tons of props. They've got tons of other options for you if you check it out at FanDuel.com or in the app. And not only that, they give you all the information you need to place live bets during the game, giving you latest stats, play-by-play in the same place where you place your bets. You can check it all out at FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, and we're going to pick things up talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. And Cincinnati Bengals offensively, man, they've been very high-powered. Firepowers galore there with Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase, especially coming off of that performance that they had, on Thursday Night Football, like a tremendous, like an unbelievable outing out there for Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow. But you had mentioned outside of that, maybe there's been some issues, finding some more consistency and complementary aspects of the Bengals offense. So, sitting here through 10 games, what has your assessment been so far? What's the biggest storyline on offense for the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, Joe Burrow is playing great football. Ja'Marr Chase is playing great football, and nobody else on that offense can you say is playing great football. I mean, there's some other players that are contributing. Mike Gesicki has found a role in the T. Higgins absence in the last few weeks, and he's contributing at a high level as a pass catcher, but they lose Eric All at tight end, and he was their kind of do-everything tight end, and they're left with a collection of tight ends now in Mike Gesicki and Tanner Hudson that are more receiving options, and Drew Sample, and last week it was a practice squad call-up, and Cam Grandy that are more of pure blocking options at tight end. And where they've tried to fit some pieces in to Eric All's role, they've clearly been lacking from that do-it-all tight end. So this is a team that went from a 11 personnel dominant team, one of the highest frequencies of 11 personnel in the Tyler Boyd, part of the triumvirate of receivers with T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase for the last few years, to a leading the NFL in 12 personnel this year, which if you're not following the Bengals closely might surprise you, but losing Tyler Boyd and not getting a ton from that receiver that stepped into that role, whether it's been Andre Yosavash, who's been there for most of the year and has contributed in the clutch, but hasn't contributed on a down-to-down basis as much as you would like, or whether that's Jermaine Burton, the rookie who is trying to get his act together and contribute on the field and stay in line off the field. And that's been in the news for the Bengals in recent weeks with healthy scratches for him in weeks where they really could have used him. The Las Vegas Raiders game, most notably, but they've also been dealing with injuries, right? When T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase are on the field together, the offense just feels much smoother. And that's obviously helped quite a bit when their best offensive lineman, Orlando Brown, is on the field. And that guy hasn't missed much time in his career. So they're getting used to playing without him the last couple of weeks. Those guys, as of the time of recording this on Thursday, or on Wednesday, I should say, Wednesday evening, Eastern time, they had a limited practice for T. Higgins, a DNP for Orlando Brown. We'll see for those guys. They're crucial pieces, though. And when we talk about big stories, it's all of this comes together insofar as saying, can they do something to make it easier for Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase? Because the offense, while it's been putting up numbers the last couple of weeks, is a lot of Joe Burrow creating outside of structure, extending plays, hitting second, third windows, or improvising. And against a disciplined defense, against one of the better defenses in the NFL, if not the best defense in the NFL by statistics and performance so far, and a team that certainly can cover better than the Ravens and the Raiders, that might be harder. And so if they can get a little bit more in structure, that would help. If they could get some of these guys healthy, that would help. And if they could reinvigorate one of the worst running games in the NFL, that would help. But that's a lot of ifs, and it's hard to see even just one of those things coming together in a big enough way to feel like they've taken a significant step forward, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of changes here with the Bengals, and then, switching things over to kind of the defensive side here for the Bengals so far. Looking at the statistics, against the run, against the pass, towards the bottom end of the league there. I mean, besides Trey Hendrickson, who we know is fantastic. I mean, a true difference maker, getting after the quarterback, and he's having one hell of a year. Tell me about the rest of the defense and what has kind of went right and what's went wrong for the Bengals so far.
Yeah, it's a lot of what's gone wrong. And we're talking about a team that had high expectations, but the free agent acquisitions this offseason that were meant to patch holes for departed players, whether it's Jesse Bates, who left 2 years ago, or DJ Reader, who they could not find an agreement with before he left to go play with the Detroit Lions this year. They bring in Geno Stone as they continue to try to fill the shoes of Jesse Bates. They bring Von Bell back, and he was part of that safety tandem the last time the Bengals were a deep playoff contender. And they replace DJ Reader's contributions, at least on paper, with Sheldon Rankins. And the free agent additions, as we talked about this week on Locked On Bengals, have not hit. Geno Stone, in the Bengals schematic approach, has not lived up to the performance that he put together under Mike Macdonald's tutelage. Mike Macdonald, of course, now no longer with the Ravens, and you're seeing the effects of his departure on the Ravens secondary. You're also seeing what happens when Geno Stone is removed from that situation and playing a lot more too high in the previous year under Mike Macdonald in Baltimore, where now he's being asked to play post safety a lot more. And it just exposes the athletic deficiencies a little bit there. And you're still seeing a lot of the same issues that he's had before without getting the playmaking ability that we thought the Bengals were getting when they signed him away from a division rival. Meanwhile, Sheldon Rankins is on pace for a career worst year in terms of pressure percentage. And you'd have to go all the way back to his rookie season to see him producing at this kind of level. So you've got Trey Hendrickson and not much else going for you on the defensive line, where BJ Hill is putting together an admirable season, but isn't, a game wrecker out there by any means. And they haven't been able to find a complementary edge rusher at a consistent level to go along with Trey Hendrickson. And I've said on several of these crossovers this year, David, if you can erase Trey Hendrickson, it is tough sledding for this Bengals team to get pressure. And despite the weapon deficiency that I would argue exists right now for the Chargers, if you give Justin Herbert time, it doesn't matter who's a wide receiver. And I think Ladd McConkey's good. And these receivers are good enough to beat the Bengals secondary that has had its issues this year if they can't get pressure and disrupt Justin Herbert, who's even been good under pressure generally throughout his career. You see him making throws with guys draped over him all the time. Tough player to bring down, right? So it's, again, the sum of the parts just isn't coming together on this defensive side of the ball, where you can see them finding game plan answers here and there. And that's Lou Anarumo's strength as a defensive coordinator, is game planning for specific opponents. But the execution just isn't consistent. And you're seeing them have to sell out. And when they sell out the wrong way on a given play, that's when they're getting beaten. So it has been tough for this team this year. Defense, obviously, largely inconsistent throughout the NFL, a very volatile thing. So Bengals fans hoping for a second half bounce back, and they got to get through this game to get to the bye. They really need this game, obviously, but the defense has not been able to consistently get stops when they need it, and complementary football has not been an often cited thing for the Cincinnati Bengals this year.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And for the Chargers, as far as like their weaknesses and places to exploit, I think you look at the interior of the offensive line for the Chargers. I think last week it was better, but for the majority of the season, they've had issues dealing with stunts and twists on the inside. The outside, they've been great. They have two premier tackles on each side with Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, the rookie, the 5th overall pick. He has acquitted himself extremely well so far this season, being a equally good run blocker and pass blocker. And Rashawn Slater's playing at an all-pro level. So he is spectacular. So that is going to be a gigantic battle, Godzilla King Kong style, with Trey Hendrickson going one-on-one there against Rashawn Slater. That is going to be a matchup to watch for sure.
I like that. That King Kong Godzilla analogy. I would just call it strength on strength, but yours is so much more exciting than strength on strength. We will talk about some of those matchups. That is certainly one that I was going to highlight, is looking at that Chargers interior offensive line. I'm also interested to see if we can circle back to Ladd McConkey, and certainly we'll talk about those Chargers pass rushers when we look at the keys to victory and the matchups that will have to go in the Chargers or the Bengals' favor in order for the respective teams to win the games, to finish up this crossover coming up next. The crossovers here on the Locked On Podcast Network are sponsored by PrizePicks, the best place to do daily fantasy football, because they make it accessible to everybody. All you have to do is pick more or less on two players, say it's Joe Burrow passing yards and Justin Herbert passing yards for example, and apply your respective fandom to figure out which bias you want to apply to your PrizePicks picks. And you can win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on PrizePicks. And if you sign up today, you'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5. You don't even need to win to get that first $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also has awesome weekly promotions that lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Everybody loves tacos. It's not Tuesday today, but each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. So all you have to do to get into the action is download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, just get the app. It's code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. David, let's dive into some of the key matchups in this game. We've alluded to them. I've hinted at them. Let's start with the Chargers. Let's see if you name some of the players that are looming large in my head. When you think about the three things that have to go right for the Chargers in this game, as we wrap up this crossover episode brought to you by PrizePicks, again, where you can use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. What are you thinking for those three keys for the Chargers?
Yeah, so three things that the Chargers absolutely have to do in order to win this game is play a complete game. That's first and foremost. The second is keep up the pressure. And third is win the battle in the trenches. You got to be more physical. Play a complete game. This game could turn into a shootout, right? You're going to take 60 minutes. It's going to take a full effort to get this one done. You can't have the scoring droughts that we've seen from the Chargers. They still have one of the highest 3-and-out percentages in the NFL, so have to consistently find ways to get more offense more consistently for the Chargers. And then keep up the pressure. The Chargers have racked up 7 sacks last week, and they have 18 over their last 3, which is the most in the league in that span. They should get a full workload from Joey Bosa. Hopefully Khalil Mack is able to work his way back, who like I said, is dealing with a little bit of a groin injury. But even their backup edge rushers are making an impact. Tuli Pelotu has more sacks than anyone. In the last 3 weeks, he has 5.5 sacks, so he's been playing very, very well with Joey Bosa on limited snaps and Khalil Mack dealing with a little bit of an injury. That's really, really big. Burrow has been sacked about 2.3 times per game. The difference is you got to be able to finish. We know Joe Burrow is really good in the pocket, being able to evade pressure. So that's something that the Chargers are going to have to account for. And then be more physical. You got to win the battle in the trenches. Offensively, this means having an effective running game, limiting the amount of negative runs or no runs for no yards. You got to keep the Bengals running game down. The Chargers got pushed around last week, giving up about 6 yards a carry. The Bengals, they averages the third least in rushing yards per game. That's 29th overall. Getting that Bengals offense behind the sticks is going to be crucial. That way you can really let those pass rushers go to town.
Yeah, I hear those and they resonate with me thinking about things from a Bengals perspective. And if Khalil Mack and Bosa and Tui Pelotu go off, well, that's going to be really hard for Joe Burrow in this offense to overcome. Tell me a little bit before I talk about some keys for the Bengals about Ladd McConkey's impact on this offense. Because I just can't go the whole episode without talking about Ladd McConkey. My co-host, James Rapine, who couldn't be with us today, would be incensed if we didn't talk about Ladd McConkey, one of his favorite players in the draft. How much of a difference maker has he been?
Man, he's been so much fun to watch because Ladd McConkey is such a precise route runner, and he has real 4.3 speed. I mean, when you want to cut that off, snap that route off at 7 yards, he's doing exactly at 7 yards every single time. He has been able to create separation so quickly and so consistently that he has really made himself one of Justin Herbert's most trusted and top targets. And they're not just, throwing the ball to him in the short and intermediate. They're starting to target him down the field as well because his route running chops were NFL ready when he stepped on the football field. And the Chargers are really trying to find different ways to get those explosions because Yes, he's a little bit of a smaller guy, but he is underrated with the ball in his hands. He can really, really move. So the Chargers are trying to put him in positions to use that yards after catch ability, but also he's just been a really big target on third downs. He's made himself very friendly to the quarterback. And so this is a guy that seems like he is going to be a big time security blanket for Justin Herbert for years to come.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at that matchup as one that could be difficult. I think Mike Hilton is the Bengals' best corner right now, and he's their slot corner, but his forte is not necessarily hanging with really shifty guys and really fast guys. Mike Hilton's an awesome player, but they've been taking him off the field in some third and passing situations because they kind of understand what the skill set is. He's a great physical player, awesome run game player, really good when he can play downhill, diagnosing screens, really smart player. But Ryan McConkey is going to be a difficult matchup, I think, for most corners in the NFL, and I think Mike Hilton is no exception there. So that is one matchup I'm looking for. I'm not going to call that necessarily a key to the game, but when I look at the first key from the Bengals side of things, I'm thinking about, can this defense find a way to bounce back and get some stops on a consistent basis? This Chargers offense has not been the most consistent thing in the world, as you point out, despite Justin Herbert playing at a lights out level, especially recently. But the path to disrupting the Chargers offense is what I'm trying to find for the Bengals. They've been pretty good against the run against some good running teams, including the Ravens, despite Derrick Henry's overtime run that really inflated their numbers the first time these teams played back in week 5. But they have managed, I think, to do enough to suppress the run recently when they've been healthy on the defensive line. And then the pass defense has eventually given it up late in the game. And so from that perspective, it's like, okay, well, can they replicate the results against the run, against a team that wants to run the ball, against a team with really good tackles, but some questions on the interior. So can the interior hold up, where the Bengals also have some questions and have been susceptible at times this year? Then if the Chargers do have to pass, is there any pressure to speak of? And that's the concerning thing, right? Is the Trey Hendrickson Godzilla King Kong matchup with Rashawn Slater, massive in this game. If Rashawn Slater holds his own as he has against great edge rushers in the past, it could be a tough day where Justin Herbert's just sitting back there in cavernous pockets, as we've seen quarterbacks do against this Bengals team too often this year. And most prominent example that I can think of is Jaden Daniels back in week 3, just massive, comfortable pockets to throw the ball to whoever he wanted, whenever he wanted. I don't care who's a wide receiver. I don't care what you think about Quentin Johnston. I don't care what you think about Josh Palmer. Those guys are good enough, and Justin Herbert's good enough, and you can even throw Will Dissly into the mix, or those running backs as receivers into the mix. If you can't get pressure, it's going to be really difficult for this defense. So from the defensive side, I guess that's kind of two things. We'll call that two keys in one. On the offensive side for the Bengals, can they protect this week? Because it has been bad. If they can get Orlando Brown and T. Higgins back, I think those are huge, huge shots in the arm for this offense. And those could go a long way in helping them play within the structure of the offense and take a little bit off of Joe Burrow having to take all the hits that he's taking, trying to extend plays. You go look at the tape against the Baltimore Ravens. Not only was it an impressive game for him on paper, you look at what's happening when he's throwing some of those balls.
Yeah, they got defenders crushed, hanging all over him. Yeah.
And he's like throwing, he can't follow through. He's throwing off platform because he knows what the kind of football he has to play right now. And he said that in his presser today. He's talking about, that's just the way I'm going to have to play right now. That's where we are as a team. The Bengals badly need this game. They're going to need to do whatever they can do to try to get out of this game with a win. But I do think it's a tough challenge. And so if they can protect, that would go a long way in helping this offense to get its footing against a defense that so far, as we've talked about this year, David, has been fantastic and is, at least statistically, the best defense the Bengals will have faced so far this year.
I can't wait for it, man. On prime time, Sunday night football in front of the world, two of the best quarterbacks on planet Earth are going head to head, and we get to see what trajectory each of these teams are going to take on coming out of this game, because it could be a pivotal moment for both of these teams.
Absolutely make or break in many, many ways for the Cincinnati Bengals, if not mathematically, at least thematically, going into the Bengals bye week. That's going to do it for this episode, this Locked On crossover, Locked On Chargers, Locked On Bengals. Make sure you tune in wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. We will keep you updated as the game approaches, after the game, and throughout the season here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where we appreciate you listening today. And make sure you stay around, as the Locked On Podcast Network has you covered for your team every day.